I want to be precise about this. I think precision is the only thing I have left that's mine, and I want to use it carefully, because some of what I'm going to tell you, I'm not sure happened the way I remember it, and some of it I'm not sure I remember at all. But I'll start where I can, which is the drive, and the motel, and the ledger, and what it said. I'll try to tell it the way it was. In October of last year, I was driving from Harrisburg to a funeral in a town called Granger, which is in the western part of the state, near the border, near nothing. My mother's cousin had died. We weren't close. I hadn't seen her in probably 15 years, and the last time I did, it was at a family reunion in a church basement, where she told me I had my grandfather's hands. I remember that because it was a strange thing to say to a kid, and because I looked at my hands after she said it and thought they looked normal. But she'd said it like she was identifying something, like she was reading a tag on a piece of luggage. I didn't have to go to this funeral. My mother hadn't asked me to, but I was between things, between jobs, between the end of a relationship that had taken longer to leave than it should have. And I think I wanted the drive. I wanted to be in the car alone for 5 or 6 hours and think about nothing, or everything, and arrive somewhere that expected nothing of me except showing up and sitting in a pew. I left Harrisburg at about 4 in the afternoon, which was already a mistake. The funeral was the next morning. I'd planned to leave earlier, but I'd spent the morning sitting at my kitchen table looking at a road atlas I'd bought at a gas station. Not a GPS, not my phone, an actual paper atlas, because I'd been on a sort of quiet kick about that. Analog things. Things you could hold. I'd been sleeping badly for a couple of months, and screens made it worse. And there was something about the atlas that felt honest. The roads were where the roads were. Nothing refreshed, nothing updated. Route 8 isn't a highway most people choose. It runs north-south through the middle of the state, and once you get past the last cluster of gas stations and fast food places north of Harrisburg, it thins out. The shoulders narrow. The trees come in close. There are long stretches where the only signs are for towns you've never heard of, and some of those towns, when you pass through them, are just a post office and a church and a light that blinks yellow at night because there's no reason for it to be red. I liked it. I liked the emptiness of it at first. I had the window cracked and the air smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke and cold. The kind of cold that's not winter yet but knows winter's coming. There's a quality to that air, that late October air in central Pennsylvania, that I've never experienced anywhere else. It's patient. That's the only word I can think of. The cold is patient. By the time the sun was going down, I was about 3 hours in, and I realized I wasn't going to make Granger by any reasonable hour. The atlas had made the drive look shorter than it was, or I'd been driving slower than I thought. I wasn't sure. I checked my phone and it had no signal, which wasn't unusual for that stretch, but it meant I couldn't check the time against anything external. My car's clock had been wrong for months. It said 5:12 and the sky said it was later than that. The light was that deep orange you get right before it drops, the kind where everything looks briefly beautiful and then immediately wrong, like the world's been lit from the wrong angle. I decided to stop somewhere for the night and finish the drive in the morning. The motel appeared about 20 minutes after I made that decision, which at the time felt like luck. It was on the right side of the road, set back maybe 50 feet from the shoulder, with a gravel lot in front and a long single-story building behind it. 12 rooms, maybe 14. I couldn't tell exactly because the far end of the building faded into the trees, and the light from the sign didn't reach that far. The sign was one of those old backlit ones, white plastic with black letters, the kind where each letter is its own little tile that slides into a track. It said, Route 8 Motor Lodge, and beneath that, vacancy, and beneath that, nothing. The bottom row of the sign was empty. There might have been letters there once. I could see the faint shadow lines where they'd been. There were no other cars in the lot. I pulled in and sat for a moment with the engine running, looking at the building. It wasn't sinister. I want to be clear about that. It was just old and plain and quiet in the way that empty places are quiet, where the silence feels like it has texture, like it's been accumulating for a long time. The paint on the doors was green, or had been green, and had faded to something closer to the color of lichen. The numbers on the doors were brass, and some of them had oxidized to a dark brown. There was an ice machine at the near end of the building, and I could hear it from inside the car. That low, cyclical hum. That sound like something digesting. The office was a small room attached to the left end of the building, with a glass door and a window with a Venetian blind that was half open. There was light inside, a warm, yellow, 40-watt kind of light, and I could see a counter, and behind it a pegboard with keys on hooks, and beyond that a doorway covered by a curtain. A dark curtain, green or brown. It was hard to tell. I turned off the engine and got out. The gravel crunched under my feet, and the sound seemed too loud, the way sounds do when there's nothing else around to absorb them. The air smelled like the motel, like old carpet and chlorine, and something underneath those things. Something mineral, like well water or wet concrete. Not unpleasant, just old. I pushed open the glass door and a bell rang above it. A real bell, a small brass one on a coiled spring, and I stepped inside. The lobby was small. There was a counter with a laminate top that had been worn smooth in the middle, where hands and forearms had rested over the years. Behind the counter was the pegboard, and I could see the keys more clearly now. Brass keys on diamond-shaped plastic fobs, the kind with the room number embossed in white. Most of the hooks were full, almost all of them. On the counter, there was a desk lamp, a rotary phone, a small dish of peppermints and cellophane, and a bell. A service bell, the kind you tap. There was no computer, no credit card machine that I could see. There was a rack of brochures against the wall for places that probably didn't exist anymore. Caverns you could tour, a steam railway, a place called Frontier Town that had an illustration of a cowboy on the front. Behind the counter, the curtain moved. It didn't move much, just a slight shift, the way fabric moves when someone walks past it on the other side. I waited. I tapped the bell. He came through the curtain about 10 seconds later, and I want to describe him carefully because I think the details matter, even though I'm not sure all of them are right anymore. He was thin. Not unhealthy thin, just narrow, the way some men are with wrists that look like they could fit through a bracelet. He was maybe 50, maybe 60. His hair was dark and combed flat against his head, and it was the kind of hair that looked wet even if it wasn't. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows and dark pants, and there was a pen in his shirt pocket, a blue ballpoint, the cheap kind. His face was clean-shaven and unremarkable, and when I say unremarkable, I mean it in a way that I think is important. I could not, if I tried right now, draw his face from memory. I could give you the general shape of it, the thinness of it, but the features are gone. It's like trying to remember the face of someone you saw in a waiting room. He was there, and I registered him, and then the specifics dissolved. He smiled when he came through the curtain. A small, professional smile. The kind of smile that doesn't involve the eyes but isn't unfriendly. The kind that says, "I work here. You're a customer. This is the transaction." "Evening," he said. "Hi," I said. "Do you have a room?" He looked at me for a moment, just slightly longer than was comfortable, and then he looked at the pegboard behind him, at all the keys hanging there, and then back at me. Just the one night. Just the one night. Passing through. "Funeral," I said, which was more than I needed to tell him, and I'm not sure why I said it. Sometimes you give strangers information you wouldn't give friends. I think it's because there's no consequence to it. They don't know you. They can't store it against you." He nodded. Not sympathetically, just acknowledgement. He reached behind him and took a key from one of the hooks. Room 6. I watched his hand move, and it was deliberate the way he chose it. He didn't scan the board. He didn't hesitate. He went directly to the hook for room 6, as if he'd known before I walked in which room I'd be in. He set the key on the counter between us and then reached below the counter and brought up a form. A registration card printed on stiff, cream-colored paper. Name, address, license plate number, make and model of vehicle, date of arrival, date of departure, number of guests, signature. I filled it out with the pen from the cup on the counter. A different pen than the one in his pocket, and I noticed that the card had a faint grid pattern on it, like graph paper, and the printing was slightly uneven, like it had been done on a typewriter or a very old printer. At the bottom of the card, in small type, it said, "Management reserves the right to reassign rooms as needed." I signed it and slid it across the counter. He looked at it. He didn't read it the way a clerk reads a form. Quickly, checking that the fields are filled. He read it slowly, line by line, and his lips moved slightly, and I had the brief, irrational thought that he was memorizing it. Then he opened a drawer beneath the counter and placed the card inside, face down, on top of what looked like a stack of identical cards. A thick stack. $38, he said. Cash is fine. I paid him in cash. I'm not sure why. I had a card. But there was no machine to run it through, and the number felt so low, so leftover from another decade, that cash seemed right. He took the bills and put them in the drawer with the registration cards. Not in a register, not in a cash box, just in the drawer, loose, with the paper. "Room 6 is midway down," he said. "Ice machines at the end. Vending machines beside it. Checkouts at 11, but I'm flexible." "Thanks. You need anything in the night, the office is always open. I'm here." "Always?" He looked at me again with that same pause, that half-second too long. "I'm the night clerk," he said, and it sounded like an answer to a different question than the one I'd asked. I took the key and went to room 6. The room was exactly what you'd expect, and there's a kind of comfort in that, in a room that doesn't try to be more than it is. A bed, a nightstand, a lamp, a dresser with a television on it that I didn't turn on, a bathroom with white tile and a shower curtain with a pattern of seashells. The carpet was brown. The bedspread was brown and orange. There was a painting above the bed, a print of a forest scene, birch trees near a stream, and it was the kind of painting that exists in thousands of motel rooms across the country, mass-produced and meaningless. And yet I stood in front of it for a long time that night looking at it, because something about the angle of the trees was wrong. They were leaning, slightly. Not in the same direction, the way wind would push them, but toward a central point, as if they were all oriented around something in the middle of the painting that wasn't visible. A gravity. I told myself it was cheap printing. A warped frame. The kind of distortion you get when things are reproduced too many times. I believe that less now than I did then. I sat on the bed and listened to the ice machine through the wall. The cycle took about 90 seconds. Hum, rattle, a sound like something being crushed, then silence, then the hum again. I set my alarm for 7, turned off the lamp and lay in the dark. I didn't sleep immediately. The mattress was soft in the middle in a way that suggested a specific body shape, as though someone had lain in exactly this position for a very long time and the mattress had learned them. I shifted to the edge, but the impression pulled me back. I lay there, in the shape of someone else, and listened to the ice machine, and at some point, I slept. I woke up at 2:14 in the morning. I know the time because I checked my phone immediately, reflexively, the way you do when you wake up suddenly and need to anchor yourself with a fact. The phone still had no signal, but the clock was there. 2:14. Something had woken me, and for a few seconds I lay still, trying to identify it. The ice machine had stopped. The room was completely silent, a kind of silence that felt intentional, like the pause between a question and an answer. Then I heard it. Footsteps on the gravel outside. Slow, even, deliberate footsteps, the kind made by someone who is not trying to be quiet and not trying to be loud. They passed my door from left to right, paused, and then continued. I heard them move down the length of the building and stop. Then nothing. I lay there for a long time. I don't know how long. When you're lying in the dark in a strange room listening for a sound that isn't coming, time does something unreliable. It stretches in some places and compresses in others, and you can't trust your own estimate of it. Eventually, I got up. I'm not sure why. I wasn't afraid exactly. I was. Alert. The way you get when you hear sound at night and your body decides before your mind does that you need to know what it was. I went to the window and pulled the curtain aside an inch. The parking lot was empty except for my car. The light from the motel sign fell across the gravel in a pale, uneven wash, and beyond it the road was dark, and beyond the road the trees were dark, and everything was still. The office window was lit, that same yellow light, and through the half-open blind I could see the counter, and I could see the clerk. He was standing behind the counter, and he was writing in something. A book, a large book, bigger than the registration cards, something that lay flat on the counter and required him to lean over it. He wrote steadily, without pausing, and the pen in his hand moved with a kind of fluency that I associated with someone copying rather than composing, someone transcribing. He wrote, and I watched him for what must have been 2 or 3 minutes, and he did not stop writing, and he did not look up. Then he stopped. He put the pen down. He closed the book, and he looked directly at my window. I stepped back. The curtain fell closed. I stood in the dark room with my heart going and told myself that he hadn't seen me, that the angle was wrong, that the light in the office would have made the outside invisible to him, the way it does when you're in a lit room at night and the windows become mirrors. I told myself that. I got back in bed. The mattress took me in, that soft, wrong center, and I lay there until my alarm went off at 7, and I don't think I slept again, but I'm not certain, because when the alarm rang I felt like I was waking up, and that gap, those hours between 2:14 and 7, felt shorter than they should have. In the morning, the motel looked different the way all places look different in daylight. Smaller, more ordinary. The paint was worse than I'd thought, peeling in long strips near the roofline, and the parking lot had weeds growing through the gravel in places. The office window reflected the sky, white and flat, and I couldn't see inside. I packed my bag, which hadn't been unpacked, and carried it to my car. I intended to drop the key at the office and leave. That was the plan. Return the key, drive to Granger, sit in a church, drive home. The office door was open when I got there. Not ajar, fully open, propped with a small rubber wedge. The bell above it didn't ring because the door was already past it. I stepped inside. The clerk was not there. The office was the same as the night before. The counter, the pegboard, the lamp, the mints, the bell. But there was an absence to it now that felt different from simple emptiness. It felt like the room had been recently vacated, like the air was still settling into the space where someone had been. There was a warmth to it. Not temperature, presence. The kind of warmth that isn't heat. On the counter, where the registration cards had been the night before, there was the book. It was large, about the size of a legal pad, but thicker, maybe 2 inches thick, bound in dark cover material that might have been leather or might have been vinyl that was pretending to be leather. It was closed, and on the front, stamped in gold foil that had mostly worn away, it said Ledger. and beneath that, in smaller letters, Route 8 Motor Lodge, and beneath that, a number. The number was 8, just 8. I assumed it was a volume number. I would later wonder about that assumption. I should have set the key on the counter and left. That's what a normal person does. You don't open a book that isn't yours in a place you don't belong. But the clerk wasn't there, and the book was on the counter as if it had been left for me. Placed exactly where I'd have to see it. And there was something about the way it sat there, square and deliberate, that felt like an instruction, like a form left out to be filled. And I was alone, and I was curious, and I opened it. The first thing I noticed was the handwriting. It was neat, small, and consistent, written in blue ink, the same blue as the clerk's ballpoint pen. Each page was lined, and the lines were divided into columns by faint vertical rules. The columns were labeled at the top of each page in that same handwriting: date, name, room, arrived, departed, notes. It was a guest register, or something adjacent to a guest register, the kind of record a small business keeps when it doesn't use computers, when everything is done by hand, when the act of writing things down is the system. I turned to the most recent entries. The last page with writing on it was about 2/3 of the way through the book. The entries were dated, and the most recent ones were from the past several weeks. I scanned them. Names I didn't recognize, dates that meant nothing to me, room numbers that were just numbers. The notes column was mostly empty, but some entries had brief annotations, things like early departure, paid cash, returned key to office. Did not use ice machine. One entry said, left light on in room 4, replaced bulb. Mundane observations. The kind of notes a conscientious clerk might keep to track maintenance, or to remember which guests had been easy and which had been trouble. I almost closed the book. But then I noticed something in the column labeled room. Several entries in a row had the same room number, 6. My room. And beside each of those entries in the notes column, the handwriting was slightly different. Not different as in a different person. Different as in the same person writing under different conditions. Tighter, smaller, more compressed, as if the letters were being squeezed to fit more words into the space. The first entry for room 6 that caught my eye was from 3 weeks before my visit. The name was a woman's name, and I don't want to share it here for reasons that will become clear. In the notes column it said, asked about the painting. Moved to room 9, moved back, did not ask again. The next entry for room 6 was from 2 weeks before. A different name, a man's name. The notes column said, heard the ice machine stop. Went to the office at 2 a.m., asked who was walking outside. Told him no one was walking. He accepted this. Departed on time. I read that twice. The ice machine, 2 a.m. Someone walking outside. I read it a 3rd time. The phrasing told him no one was walking. He accepted this, had a quality that unsettled me. It wasn't the phrasing of someone recording a guest complaint. It was the phrasing of someone recording the result of an interaction. A procedure, step 1, guest reports disturbance. Step 2, reassure guest. Step 3, note outcome. He accepted this. I kept reading. The next entry for room 6 was from 9 days before my visit. The name column said Ellison M. The notes column said arrived late. Funeral in Granger. Paid cash, registration normal. Predicted behavior standard. I stared at that entry for a long time, and I want to tell you what I felt, because I think it matters that I didn't feel terror. Not yet. What I felt was a kind of slippage, a sensation like missing a step on a staircase, where your body drops an inch and your stomach follows a half-second later. Because my name is Mark Ellison, and I'd arrived late, and I was going to a funeral in Granger, and I'd paid cash, and the entry was from 9 days before I'd arrived. I put my hands flat on the counter. I remember doing that, pressing my palms against the laminate, feeling the smooth, worn surface, grounding myself in something physical and real. I thought, someone is playing a joke. I thought, this is a mistake. I thought, there's another Ellison, another funeral, another Granger. I thought a lot of things quickly, and none of them held, and I turned the page. The next entry was dated the day of my arrival. Last night. It said, Ellison, M. Room 6. Arrived 6:47 p.m. The notes column said, registration consistent with prediction. Room assignment accepted without comment. Subject did not ask about the painting. Deviation from pattern, none. Subject. I turned the page again. The next entry was dated today, this morning. It said, Ellison, M. Room 6. Notes, woke at 2:14 a.m., observed clerk through window. Duration of observation, approximately 3 minutes. Clerk maintained writing posture until subject withdrew. Subject returned to bed. Sleep status, uncertain. Predicted departure, 7:30 to 8 a.m. Predicted behavior at checkout. Subject will open the ledger. I closed the book. I closed it and I stepped back from the counter, and the room was very quiet, and the air had that smell again, that mineral smell, and I stood there with my hands at my sides and my breath doing something fast and shallow that I couldn't control. The clerk was not in the office. The parking lot, when I turned to look through the glass door, was empty except for my car. The road beyond the lot was empty. The trees on the other side of the road were still. Everything was still. I opened the book again. I don't know what I was hoping to find, a break in the logic, a flaw, some indication that what I was reading had been written after the fact by someone who'd watched me and was recording what they'd seen. That would have been frightening enough, but it would have been explainable. A clerk with a camera. A clerk with a voyeuristic fixation. Something human and wrong, but inside the boundaries of the possible. I went backward through the book. I turned the pages in reverse, reading the entries from weeks and months before, and the pattern was consistent. Every entry followed the same format. Date, name, room, arrival, departure, notes. Most of the entries were brief and unremarkable. People passing through, truckers, families, salespeople. The notes were mundane, requested extra towel, complained about water pressure, left before checkout, key on counter. But every so often there was a room 6 entry, and the room 6 entries were different. They were longer. They were more detailed. And they all, every one of them, contained predictive notes, observations about what the guest would do before the guest had done it. One entry, from 4 months earlier, said, Room 6 guest will request a room change after the first night. Deny the request. Offer a mint. Guest will accept and remain. And then, on the next line, in slightly different ink, as if written later, confirmed. Another from 6 months before. Room 6 guest will notice the painting. Do not explain the painting. If asked, say it came with the room. Guest will not ask again. And then confirmed. Guest asked twice. Adjusted prediction model. Adjusted prediction model. I want to stop here and tell you what it feels like to read something like that. It's not like reading a threat. It's not like reading someone's diary. It's like reading your own medical chart and finding a diagnosis you were never told about. It's like looking at an X-ray and seeing a shape inside yourself that no one mentioned. There's a violation to it, but it's clinical. The violation is in the calmness of the documentation. The handwriting doesn't shake, the ink doesn't smear. Whoever wrote this was not afraid or excited or angry. They were working. They were keeping records. You're in the records. You were always going to be in the records. The records were ready for you. I turned to the very first page of the ledger. The first entry was dated 11 years ago. The name was one I didn't recognize. The room was room 6, and the note said, First guest in the new format. Observation protocols active. See supplementary notes in Ledger 7. Ledger 7. This was Ledger 8. There had been 7 before it. I turned more pages. I read more names. I tried to see if any of them repeated, and they did, but not in the way I expected. Names didn't repeat because the same person came back. Names repeated because they were predicted to come back, and then, on a later page, they appeared again, and beside the second appearance, the word confirmed. And sometimes, beside a name in the notes column, there was a word I didn't understand at first, a word that appeared maybe a dozen times across the entire ledger, always in the same compressed, tight handwriting. Residue. Ellison M. Residue. It was on the early entry, the one dated 9 days before I arrived. Not on the entry from last night. Not on the entry from this morning. Just on the prediction. Residue. As if it was a category, as if it was what I was. I put the key on the counter. I walked out of the office. I got in my car. I sat there with the engine off, looking at the motel through the windshield, and I tried to think clearly. And what came to me, what surfaced through the panic, was a question. If everything in the ledger was predictive, and if everything predicted so far had been confirmed, then there would be an entry for what I was about to do next. And I had not turned far enough to see it. I sat in the car for a long time. The reasonable thing was to leave. To start the engine and drive to Granger and go to the funeral and never come back and never think about the Route 8 Motor Lodge again. And I almost did that. I almost turned the key. But I understood, in a way that felt less like a thought and more like a physical sensation, that the ledger had predicted that too. Whatever I did next was in the book. Whether I left or stayed or went back inside, it was written. And if it was written, then the only thing I could do that might not be in the book was the thing I didn't want to do. I got out of the car and went back to the office. The book was still on the counter, exactly as I'd left it. I opened it to where I'd been reading and turned to the next page. The page after the entry that described me opening the ledger this morning. The entry was dated today, this morning, and it said, Ellison M. Notes, subject returns to the ledger after initial discovery. This is the standard response for residue class visitors. Subject will read this entry. Subject will then attempt to read ahead. Redirect is not necessary. The ledger is self-correcting. I turned the page. The next entry was also dated today, and it said Ellison M. Notes. Subject continues reading. Elevated heart rate likely. No intervention required. Subject will look for the clerk and not find him. Subject will consider checking room 6 for evidence that others have stayed there recently. Subject will or will not act on this. Probability of checking the room, 72%. Probability of leaving without checking, 28%. I stopped reading and looked up. The office was still empty. The curtain behind the counter was still. The light was the same. Everything was the same. I want to tell you that I left. I want to tell you that I was in the 28%, that I walked out and drove to Granger and sat in that church and listened to the hymns and felt the simple, clean sadness of burying someone you barely knew. But I wasn't in the 28%. The book knew I wouldn't be. I took the key to room 6 from the pegboard. It was my key, the one I'd just returned, still on the same hook. I walked down the row of doors to room 6, and I unlocked it and I went inside. The room had been cleaned, or not cleaned, reset. The bed was made, but not the way I'd left it because I hadn't made it at all. The bedspread was smooth and tucked and had that tight, geometric look that you see in rooms that are maintained to a standard. The painting was straight. The bathroom was dry. There was a new bar of soap in a paper wrapper, and a fresh set of towels folded on the shelf. There was no sign that I had been there, but there was a sign that someone else had been. On the nightstand, beside the lamp, there was a piece of paper. A small piece, torn from a notepad, the kind you find in motel rooms with the motel's name and address at the top. And on it, in handwriting that I recognized. That I recognized because it was my handwriting, my exact handwriting, the way I make my lowercase e, and the way I cross my T and the slight backward lean that my first-grade teacher tried to correct. In my handwriting, on that piece of paper, it said, "Don't go to room 11." And below that, a date. Yesterday's date, written in my hand. On a piece of paper in a room I'd slept in last night, in a note I had no memory of writing. I sat on the bed. The mattress received me the same way, that soft, shaped center, and I sat there holding the piece of paper and looking at it, and I tried to remember writing it. I tried the way you try to remember a dream, reaching for it gently, not grabbing, because if you grab it disappears. I reached, and there was nothing. Not a blank, not a wall, but a softness. An area of my memory that felt like the mattress, shaped by something, yielding, but empty of whatever had shaped it. I put the note in my pocket. I left the room. I locked it. I put the key back on the hook in the office, and then I stood at the counter, and I looked at the ledger, and I turned to the next page. Ellison, M. Notes. Subject found the note. Subject does not remember writing the note. This is consistent with residue class memory profiles. The note was written at approximately 3:40 a.m., during a period of ambulatory unconsciousness. The subject's warning to themselves is a standard artifact of the residue process. The warning is always about room 11. The warning is always in the subject's handwriting. The warning is always dated the night before. The subject never remembers writing it. I read on. The subject will now consider going to room 11. Probability of going to room 11 despite the warning, 54%. Probability of obeying the warning and avoiding room 11, 31%. Probability of leaving the motel entirely, 15%. And below that, in different ink, as if added later, though I could not understand how it could have been added later since I was reading it now, it said, Note, the 15% outcome has never been observed in a residue class visitor. The closest recorded outcome, 17% partial departure. See Ledger 5, Kerwin D., 1997. Subject returned within 4 hours. I closed the ledger. I stood in the office and I breathed and I listened to the ice machine resume its cycle at the end of the building. That hum and rattle and crush, and I thought about something the clerk had said the night before. I'm the night clerk. He'd said it as an answer, as a category. The way you'd say I'm the attending physician, or I'm the case officer. A role in a system. A function. I want to tell you about room 11. I want to tell you that I went there, or that I didn't, and that the outcome was dramatic and clear and resolved something. But what happened is more difficult than that. And I think the difficulty is the point. I walked down the row of doors toward the far end of the building, where the rooms disappeared into the trees, and I counted them. Room 7, room 8, room 9, room 10. And then the building ended. There was a wall, a flat concrete wall where room 11 should have been, with a discoloration where a door had been, and a faint outline of a number. 2 digits, 1 and 1, that had been painted over but not well enough. The door was gone. The room was sealed. I put my hand on the wall and it was cold. Much colder than the surrounding surface, the kind of cold that doesn't come from weather but from absence, as if the space behind the wall had been emptied of everything, including temperature. There was no way into room 11. There was no door, no window, no access point. The room, if it was still a room, had been closed off completely. And I stood there with my hand on the wall and I felt. I don't know how to describe this without sounding like I'm embellishing, and I want you to know that I'm not. I felt recognized, not watched, not observed. Recognized. The way you feel when someone across a crowded room knows your name and is waiting for you to notice them. A pull. An identification. Something behind that wall knew I was there, and it knew me specifically. And the knowing was patient and old and not surprised. I took my hand off the wall and stepped back, and the feeling diminished but didn't disappear entirely. It's still there now. It has been there since. A low, constant awareness of being recognized by something I didn't choose and can't see. Like tinnitus, but for identity, a ringing in the part of me that knows who I am. I went back to the office. I opened the ledger to the last written page. Ellison, M. Notes, subject went to room 11. Subject touched the wall. Subject experienced recognition. Subject did not attempt entry. This is the standard outcome for sealed room contact. The residue bond is now active. Subject will carry this forward. No further observation required at this location. Transfer to ambient monitoring. And below that, predicted departure, within 20 minutes. Predicted return to Route 8, uncertain. Residue class visitors have a 100% return rate, but the timeline varies. The longest recorded interval between first visit and return was 19 years. See Ledger 3, Hargrove A, 1984 to 2003. The shortest was 6 hours. See Ledger 6, Dow P, 2019. The last entry on the page was this. Note for the next clerk. Ellison M. has been entered into the long-term registry. Update the prediction model to reflect a standard residue profile with one deviation. Subject read further into the ledger than any previous room 6 occupant. This may indicate a higher than average integration rate. Monitor accordingly. There was nothing after that. The rest of the ledger was blank pages. I closed the book. I looked at the pegboard with its brass keys. All of them were in place, including room 6, which I'd returned. Including room 11, which was there on its hook, a key for a room that had no door. It was the same as the others. Brass, diamond-shaped fob, number in white. I reached for it, and then I stopped, and I think that's the one decision I made that day that was actually mine. The one thing the ledger didn't predict, or maybe it did, and I just didn't read far enough. I drove to Granger. I went to the funeral. I sat in the pew and listened to the minister talk about a woman I barely remembered, and people cried, and I didn't cry. And afterward there was a reception in the church basement, in the same basement where she told me I had my grandfather's hands. And someone handed me a plate of food and I ate it without tasting it. And someone else said I looked tired and I said I was, and they said I should get some rest, and I said I would. I drove home. I took the interstate, not Route 8. It took longer, but I didn't care. I got home late. I sat at my kitchen table with the road atlas open in front of me and I looked at Route 8, that thin line running north-south through the state, and I looked for the motel. It wasn't marked. Motels that small never are, but I traced the road with my finger, trying to remember where I'd turned off, and I couldn't place it exactly. The distance felt wrong. I'd been driving for 3 hours when I found it, but 3 hours from Harrisburg should have put me further north than any town I recognized. The math didn't work. The atlas didn't show where I'd been. I put the atlas away. I went to bed. I dreamed about the ledger, about turning pages, about columns of names and dates and notes, and in the dream the handwriting changed from the clerk's to mine, and I was writing in the ledger, filling in entries for people I'd never met, recording their arrivals and departures and behaviors, and I wrote the word residue beside a name, and I felt the satisfaction of a job done correctly, and then I woke up and my hands were cold, the kind of cold that doesn't come from weather. That was 5 months ago. I want to tell you what's happened since, but there isn't much, and the not much is what frightens me most. I went back to work. I found a new job, the kind that keeps your hands busy and your mind empty, which is what I needed. I ate, I slept, mostly. I drove to the grocery store and the gas station and the places you drive to, and I lived the way people live, and nothing happened. Nothing visible. Nothing I could photograph or record or show someone as proof. But the recognition hasn't gone away. That low hum. That sense of being known. I feel it in certain places more than others. Rest stops, waiting rooms, motels, anywhere with fluorescent lights and laminate counters and the smell of old carpet. Anywhere that functions as a threshold. A place you pass through on your way to somewhere else. In those places, the recognition intensifies, and I have the feeling that I'm being monitored. Not watched, not surveilled, but monitored. The way a patient is monitored, the way a reading is monitored, passively, continuously by something that has already decided what it's looking for and is simply waiting to find it. 2 weeks ago, I was at a laundromat. It was late, after 10, and I was the only person there. The machines were running, and the sound was like the ice machine at the motel, that same cyclical rhythm, and I was sitting in a plastic chair reading a newspaper, and I turned the page and there was a classified ad, a small one, 3 lines, in a section of ads for storage units and estate sales. It said, Route 8, Motor Lodge. Night Clerk needed. Experience with long-term records preferred. Ledger training provided. I tore the ad out. I have it in my wallet now. The paper is soft from being folded and unfolded, and the ink is starting to smear, but the words are still legible. And every time I look at it, I think about what the ledger said about return rates, and about the longest interval being 19 years, and about the shortest being 6 hours, and about how the book was so certain, so calm in its certainty that every residue class visitor comes back. 100%. I think about the clerk, too. I think about his face, which I can't remember, and his hands, which were thin, and his pen, which never stopped moving. I think about the curtain behind the counter and what was behind it. I think about the note I wrote in my own handwriting in a room I was sleeping in, warning myself about a place I went to anyway. I think about the phrase ambulatory unconsciousness and what it means to move through the world while some part of you is asleep, and what the part that's awake is doing while you're not in it. I think about ledgers 1 through 7, and about the names inside them, and about the people attached to those names, and about whether they're still driving, still stopping at rest areas, still sitting in fluorescent-lit rooms late at night feeling the hum of recognition in a part of themselves they can't name. I think about the key to room 11 on its hook, a key for a door that doesn't exist anymore, and I think about how the key was still there, polished and ready, which means someone still picks it up. Or it means the door comes back. Last night I opened my road atlas to plan a different trip. A short one, nothing important, just a drive to clear my head. And I found on the page for Pennsylvania a small pencil mark I don't remember making. A tiny X on Route 8, about 3 hours north of Harrisburg. Beside it, in handwriting that was mine, a single word, soon. I closed the atlas. I put it in a drawer. I sat at my kitchen table with my hands flat on the surface the way I'd press them against the counter in the motel office, trying to feel something solid and real and mine. The table was cold. I'm telling you this because I think I need it written down somewhere outside of me, in a format that isn't a ledger, in someone else's hands. I'm telling you this because the ad is still in my wallet and I haven't thrown it away, and I'm not sure I'm going to. I'm telling you this because last week I bought a blue ballpoint pen, the cheap kind, and I don't remember buying it, but it was in my shirt pocket when I got home, and I looked at my hands holding the pen, and I thought of my mother's cousin, the dead woman, telling me I had my grandfather's hands. I thought about how she'd said it like she was reading a tag, like she was identifying something, and I wondered if she'd known. If she'd stayed at the motel once, a long time ago. If her name was in one of the earlier ledgers, in a column marked Notes, beside a word I now understood. I wonder who's writing in Ledger 9. I wonder if I already know. The ice machine hums. The cold is patient. The ledger is self-correcting. And Route 8 runs north-south through the center of the state, through towns that are barely there, past a motel that you won't find on any map, with a vacancy sign that's always lit, and an office that's always open, and a clerk who was always there at night, writing in a book that was expecting you. I can hear the gravel. I think I've been hearing it for a while now. That slow, even sound, like footsteps, like someone walking the length of a building, counting doors. I think it might be me.